The cabin wasn't marked on any map. It sat in a bend of the timberline forest, 2 miles from the nearest dirt road, swallowed by pine shadows and silence. From the satellite photos, it looked like a storage shed, maybe a hunting retreat. Nothing unusual. But Agent Elena Navarro had been tracking chatter for weeks. Encrypted bursts routed through masked servers, too frequent, too carefully placed. Something was wrong out here, and this morning her team was moving in. The sun hadn't yet crested the ridge when the black SUV rolled to a quiet stop. 4 agents emerged in full tactical gear, boots crunching gently on frost-hardened ground. Navarro was the last to step out. She wasn't tall, but there was a stillness in her posture that always settled a team's nerves. Her gaze swept the trees, alert but unreadable. "Eyes sharp," she whispered. "No noise, we're 10 minutes ahead of schedule." Her partner, Agent Reese Danner, gave a single nod. They'd run drills for weeks, studied the terrain, reviewed thermal data. They were ready. Elena adjusted her earpiece, double-checked the miniature transmitter clipped into her hair, a tactical device barely visible unless you were looking for it. Standard issue for covert entries. The signal was solid. She tapped her body cam once to confirm recording. Then she started forward. The others fanned out in a crescent formation as planned. Navarro advanced directly up the slope toward the cabin, her steps calculated and silent. A faint wind stirred the treetops, but everything else felt still. Unnaturally so. From Reese's position 20 meters west, he could see her reach the porch. She raised a fist. "Hold." He froze. Her hand slipped to her sidearm, unholstered. Another signal. "Moving in." She pressed the door open slowly and stepped inside. The camera feed on Reese's tablet showed a blur as she swept left, then right, her standards. Room clear motions, then the screen froze. "Hold up," he muttered into comms. "I lost her video." Static. He tried her name. "Navarro, confirm visual. You copy?" Nothing. He checked the GPS ping from her hair clip. It was still transmitting, still inside. Then it stopped. "Team, move," Reese ordered sharply. The quiet crackled as boots burst from the tree line and surrounded the cabin. They breached. Room by room, they cleared the structure. Shotguns drawn, flashlights cutting through the dark wood interior. Empty. No bodies, no hostiles, no signs of a struggle. But 2 coffee mugs sat on a small table, steam rising faintly from both. A tactical bag was slumped open in the corner. A burner phone lay face down on a cot. The mattress was still warm, and Elena was gone. Reese stood in the middle of the single-room cabin, heart pounding, trying to force the pieces to make sense. The entry had been clean. She had gone in just minutes earlier. The logs on the floor, undisturbed. No dragging, no prints, not even boot scuffs. Her body cam was still clipped to the wall hook by the entrance, neatly unlatched as if she'd removed it herself. "Navarro?" He tried again. Quieter now. Silence answered. They scoured the perimeter. No blood, no noise, no sign of anything. Just those 2 cups of coffee, one half empty, one untouched. By nightfall, the site was swarming with federal response teams, K-9 units, and overhead drones. They mapped the forest. They drained the cabins well. They even brought in thermal sweeps. Nothing. The official report would come days later. Agent Elena Navarro disappeared during a raid in Timberline National Forest. No signs of foul play were confirmed. Possible theories include an unauthorized solo pursuit of suspects, mental health deterioration, or intentional defection. But Reese didn't buy it. Not for a second. He'd worked with Elena for 5 years. Knew her rhythm, her mind, the steel core resolve she never advertised. She didn't just walk away. And if she'd gone after something, she'd have left a trace. But the only trace was what she didn't leave. 3 days after the raid, the Bureau locked down the file. Her case was reclassified. Reese was reassigned. Still, he kept a copy of her last audio check. "Navarro, entering now. Cabin is quiet. Doors are unlocked. Something feels..." The file ended there. Mid-sentence. Cut off at 9:42 a.m. In the months that followed, no new evidence surfaced. Not in satellite reviews, not in black market chatter, not in any internal leads. She had vanished into air. But there was one thing Reese hadn't told the Bureau. That day in the cabin, just before his tablet lost her GPS blip, He'd received a faint, double-tap ping from her hair clip. 2 sharp pulses. A manual SOS. It meant observed, compromised. Reese had played that pattern in his head 100 times since, and though the world moved on, and her name faded from the active rosters, and analysts whispered about psych breaks and career burnout, Reese waited. Waited for the signal to return. The Bureau buried her fast. By the time spring snow melted off the high trails near Timberline, Elena Navarro was already a closed case. Her badge was pulled from the registry. Her personnel file was sealed. Her face disappeared from the intranet homepage. No farewell memo, no line of duty memorial, no plaque. Just gone. Her sister Carla got the worst of it. A single envelope arrived at her apartment in Denver. Elena's official badge, a condolence letter that read like it had been written by AI, and a thin paper file labeled Presumed Deceased. That word, presumed, sliced deeper than any certainty. Carla called Reese just once in those early weeks. He could still hear the sound of her voice trembling over the line. She always told me, if anything ever happened to her, I should wait 3 days. Not 1, not 2, 3. That's how long she said it would take for the truth to sink. Art cracking. Reese hadn't known what to say then. He didn't know now. He kept his head down at the office, took a lateral transfer to the Missing Persons Division in Oregon. It was quieter work. Data runs, phone interviews, cold case follow-ups. Just enough noise to mask his real priority, Elena. Every weekend, Reese returned to Timberline. Not officially, not in bureau gear. Just him, his notebook, and a thermal scanner he'd bought himself off a supplier in Sacramento. He'd walk the cabin site again, sometimes alone, sometimes with an off-duty ranger who owed him a favor. Still nothing. Every log and pine root the same. Every lead ended in fog. Until the drone call. It was late September, exactly 1 year and 5 days after the raid, when a forestry tech from the state environmental team reached out. Reese didn't know the guy. They had no shared contacts, but the man had flagged Reese's name through a buried interagency note. Agent previously involved in Timberline tactical ops. It's probably nothing, the tech had said over the phone, but one of our wildfire survey drones caught a weird signal bounce. We were flying a mapping sweep over Sector 8, and the interference kept pulsing in threes. Triple ping? Reese had asked. Yeah, couldn't decode it, but it's definitely encrypted. Some kind of law enforcement signal, we think. Reese's pulse didn't spike, didn't show a flicker, but he was already walking to his car. Send me the coordinates. The forest had changed. The previous summer's wildfires had blackened the southern ridge, melted bark, exposed old stone columns that had long been hidden by undergrowth. Reese followed the GPS pings up the newly scorched slope, the air still faintly smelling of ash and dry pine. It took him 2 hours to reach the point. A dip in the terrain formed a natural bowl, and at its center, half covered by moss and tang, lead root, sat a concrete hatch, rusted and padlocked shut. The forestry tech's drone had caught the signal bouncing from beneath this hill. The readings were weak but consistent, encrypted, high frequency and bouncing every 12 minutes in perfect intervals. Reese knelt beside the hatch, brushed away the vines, and saw what he feared and hoped. The Bureau's old T4 encryption seal still etched into the lid. They hadn't used that frequency in over a decade, and yet, someone had reactivated it. He ran the numbers through his handheld receiver. Decryption key, accepted. Device name, unknown. Status, active. Battery level 3%. Reese's breath caught. It was a tactical microtransmitter, same model the Bureau embedded in field-use tactical hair clips. Same model Elena had worn. Still transmitting. Still alive? He traced the signal's depth, roughly 2.5 meters underground through solid earth and concrete. Either someone was still using it, or someone had buried it intentionally, just shallow enough to be found. He looked around the clearing. No footprints, no path. Just old timber runoff and a dried-up creek that fed into a nearby canal trench. He almost didn't notice the glint of metal wedged in the canal grate. But there it was, half submerged, dull with sediment. He waded in, pulled it free. A cracked bureau-issued GPS dive watch. Serial scratched, glass shattered, but the backplate was unmistakable. He turned it over. The inside still held the faded etching, EN. That night, Reese sat in his apartment with the transmitter on the table, the watch beside it, and every light off but one. He didn't call anyone, not the Bureau, not Carla, not even the forestry tech. Instead, he turned the transmitter over and over in his hands, feeling its weight, its silence. 1 year ago, it had stopped pinging mid-raid. The signal had vanished. Now it was back, weak, flickering, but back. And someone had buried it just deep enough to hide, but not deep enough to lose. A breadcrumb, a whisper, a message. Still here. Come find me. The lock on the hatch had rust. Ed, but not enough to hold against a determined crowbar. Reese returned to the site at dawn. No backup, no official sanction. Just a headlamp, a pack with climbing gear, a first aid kit, and the forestry drone tech, Mason, standing a few feet back watching nervously. "You're sure about this?" Mason asked, shifting his weight. "No," Reese said honestly, "but the transmitter's still active." Mason glanced toward the tree line. "Weird thing is, this hatch isn't on any old Department of Forestry plans, and I checked all the soil surveys going back to the 70s. Nothing." Reese gave him a sharp look. "That means someone built it off the record, or someone erased it." With a grunt, Reese jammed the crowbar under the latch, and with a loud screech of protesting metal, the hatch gave way. Cold, stagnant air belched out from below. A narrow shaft dropped into darkness, carved in concrete and damp with years of decay. Mason stepped forward, peering down. "You think she's down there?" "I think whatever happened to her started here." Reese clipped a rope to an old iron ring beside the hatch, tested it, then began his descent. The air was colder than expected, unnaturally so, and smelled faintly of mildew and old machinery. About 20 feet down, his boots touched earth. He swung his flashlight in a wide arc. The tunnel stretched in both directions. One end collapsed by soil and time, the other vanished into pitch. Faint drag marks etched into the dust, not recent, not fresh, but unmistakably human. He followed them. The silence was unbearable. Every few steps, water dripped from somewhere unseen, echoing like distant footsteps. The walls were rough concrete, lined occasionally with rusted hooks, old power boxes, and long-dead light fixtures. Some part of him wondered if this had once been a Cold War escape route or maybe a military storage corridor, but it didn't feed. Official. It felt hidden. And then he saw it. A flash of silver. Half buried in the dirt lay a Bureau-issue sidearm, standard Glock 19. Its serial was half worn, but the initials engraved into the side grip were perfectly intact. Ian Elena Navarro's weapon. It hadn't been fired. Reese crouched down, heart pounding. The pistol wasn't dropped in haste, it was placed, clean, deliberate, facing outward like a marker. He looked up at the wall and saw, barely visible beneath the grime, a faint scrawl scratched into the concrete. "I'm not gone." Reese's breath caught. The writing looked rushed, done with a blade or a nail, but it was clear. She'd been here, alive, conscious, communicating. "Navarro," he whispered, "what happened to you?" Further down the tunnel, he found more signs. A torn patch from a Bureau jacket, a cracked radio earpiece. The pieces weren't scattered, they were spaced, like someone leaving a trail. And the strangest detail of all? Each item had been partially buried, as if someone had tried to hide them, and then later unhide them, like breadcrumbs clawed back up through the dirt. An hour later, Reese emerged back into the light, grim-faced and pale. Mason, waiting nervously at the top, looked startled as he hauled Reese back up. "Jesus, you okay?" "She was down there," Reese said quietly. "She left a trail." Mason blinked. "Wait, you mean she's still alive?" "I don't know." Reese hesitated. "But if she died down there, she didn't go easy." Back in his temporary office, Reese spread the recovered items across the desk. The gun, the earpiece, the jacket patch, each one told a part of the story, but not the ending. He logged on to the Bureau's restricted archive, tapped into redacted case files, cross-referenced covert tunnel systems built pre-1990s by non-military contractors. Only one match came up. Project Cindergate, location, unknown, status, decommissioned, function, transport, and emergency containment. Primary use, redacted. Buried in the notes was a single phrase. Connects to Sector 12, old. Spillway near the canal system. Area now designated Forest Recovery Zone. Reese felt his skin crawl. The canal. That dry trench where he'd found her watch. It wasn't just runoff, it was part of the old structure, and if that part of the tunnel system was still intact, he picked up her transmitter again. The signal was fading. Only 2% battery now. He needed to go back. That night, Reese didn't sleep. He rewatched her last field recordings before the raid in the weeks leading up to it. She'd been edgy, talking to the camera like it was the only one listening. This place isn't a storage shed. Something moves out here at night. Not animals, not hikers. I don't think they're just smuggling. I think they're testing something. There's equipment down there, non-commercial, biosecure. If I disappear, follow the signal. I'll bury it where they can't reach. She'd known. Even then, she knew what she was walking into and planned for it. And now, a year later, her transmitter had somehow come back online, right beneath that canal system. Somewhere inside a forgotten government tunnel, Elena Navarro had fought to leave a trail. The Bureau had closed her case, but Reese knew better. This wasn't over, not even close. The next morning, Reese called in a favor. He didn't go through Bureau channels this time, not after what he found buried in the Project Cindergate files. The moment he'd accessed those documents, a quiet lock had clicked into place. His session auto-logged, metadata wiped. The system froze. Access denied. So he made a different call, to someone he trusted. Her name was Lyra Park, former FEMA structural engineer turned private contractor. She specialized in post-disaster excavation. They'd worked together on a flood case in New Mexico years ago. She didn't ask many questions. Within 48 hours, they were back at the canal system, standing over Tao. A dried trench lined in stone. Lyra walked the perimeter in silence, kicking through moss and debris. She stopped at a rusted drainage grate nearly swallowed by vines. "Looks like a vent shaft," she muttered. "This area was probably flood-controlled in the 60s. That means there's access tunnels beneath it. Utility, emergency spillways." She crouched, tapping her boot against the metal. "Hear that?" she said. "Hollow." Reese nodded. "There's a transmitter signal, about 12 feet below." Lyra narrowed her eyes. "You're sure it's not interference?" "No," Reese said. "It belongs to someone who went missing, someone who left a trail." Lyra examined the surrounding stonework, then stepped back. "We'll need ground sonar to see how stable it is, but I'll bet you anything there's a secondary access tunnel running behind that ridge." She pointed toward the slope of brush and dead trees just beyond the canal curve. "Right about there." By noon, they had confirmation. Lyra's equipment mapped a shallow tunnel beneath the ridge, reinforced concrete, intact but fragile. A pressure cavity showed a possible chamber about 40 feet long. No records, no permits, just void. They started digging. Reese worked until his hands bled. Lyra's team brought portable excavation drills, but they moved slowly. Noise control was key. They didn't know who else might be watching. By dusk, they hit steel. An old vault door, its hinges half welded by corrosion. The keypad was destroyed, nothing but melted plastic and dust. But the seal was weak, and Reese had a crowbar. It took them 3 hours, every inch a battle. Then finally, a groan of metal. The door cracked open. The air that escaped was sharp, stale, almost metallic. Not decay, but abandonment, like a place sealed too long. Reese aimed his flashlight down the narrow stairwell. Concrete walls, rusted pipes, water-stained steps leading deep into the earth. They descended. The tunnel beyond wasn't empty. They passed equipment, old desks, toppled chairs, scattered file boxes torn apart by dam. The deeper they went, the clearer it became. This hadn't just been storage, it had been used. And recently, fresh footprints in the dust, crate indentations, drag marks. Reese crouched beside a broken crate, A torn barcode strip clung to the side. Property of Cindergate, Biocontainment, Level 2. "What the hell were they doing down here?" Lyra whispered. He didn't answer. He was staring at the next item in the dirt. A bureau-issue field notebook, half-soaked but legible. Inside, scribbled entries in Elena Navarro's handwriting. Heard voices again. Not guards. Civilians, maybe. 2 men speaking Russian. Couldn't understand all of it. Second transmitter failed. Switched to hair clip unit. Buried signal near upper shaft, praying someone finds it. No daylight in 19 days. Saw red light through vent slats, moving equipment, something alive in the tank. Don't think it's human. Reese shut the notebook, hands trembling. They weren't just holding her, they were doing something down here. Testing, transporting, containing. Elena had found it, and for that, they had disappeared her. A sharp whistle echoed through the corridor. Lyra called out from up ahead. "Found another chamber!" Reese rushed to join her. She was standing at the edge of a split passageway. One side collapsed, the other half open. Inside, a small chamber, cots, lockers, old food containers, and on the wall, burned into the plaster by a lighter or a blade, Sector 4, no entry. Beyond it, a sealed metal hatch with a biometric lock, long dead. Reese kicked it once. It didn't budge. But below the warning was something else. A symbol, small, almost invisible, etched into the corner. He knelt and traced it with his finger. The Bureau's Black Ops insignia, not standard, not public. He and Elena had only seen it once. During a joint briefing on a surveillance operation no one was all owed to talk about. Back when they still worked together. Back when she was alive. Lyra touched his arm. "We need to stop here, Reese. The air's getting worse. CO2 levels are rising." He nodded, heart pounding. They had to go back. For now. But this place, this forgotten tunnel system, buried beneath a forest everyone thought was empty, wasn't abandoned. It had been hidden. And someone had gone to great lengths to make sure Elena Navarro stayed hidden with it. That night, Reese returned to his motel and locked the door behind him. He laid out what he'd recovered. The gun, the field notes, a small silver bracelet, tarnished but intact from the tunnel cot, and the transmitter, now dead at 0%. He stared at the field journal again, at the scratchy final page. "They're planning a move. Something big. I think they're clearing out the tunnels. If this is my last message and someone finds this, tell Reese I tried. Tell him I stayed awake. I fought. I left a light on." He closed the notebook, and for the first time in a year, Reese cried. Reese didn't sleep. He sat at the edge of the motel bed, Elena's field notebook still in his hands, reading every word until the ink began to blur. Not from water damage, from his own tears. She hadn't given up. Even in that hellhole beneath the forest, surrounded by darkness and silence, she'd stayed alert, documenting everything, leaving trails, signals, evidence, breadcrumbs for someone who might still be looking. And now he was. He scanned the notebook again, this time focusing on patterns. In one entry, Elena mentioned overhearing names, Russian voices speaking quickly. 2 male voices, one name kept appearing, Volkov. That same name appeared again 3 pages later. Volkov's team moved another container today. Heated transfer, Sector 4 again. Whatever they're protecting, it's not human. They call it the specimen. Reese's stomach turned. The Bureau had shut down this site decades ago, but clearly someone had reactivated it, quietly, illegally, and if Elena's notes were right, they were moving. Something through those tunnels. Something dangerous. The next day, Reese met Lyra outside the motel at 5:00 a.m. She had 2 coffees in hand and a USB drive around her neck. "I stayed up mapping the structural integrity of the entire ridge," she said, passing him the drive. "There's more down there than we thought. Chambers sealed off, air shafts rerouted. Whoever built it wanted it to last. And wanted it hidden," Reese added. She nodded. "I also cross-checked that barcode from the crate we found. It's real. Coded to a defunct logistics company called Red Vault, shut down in 2002, but one of their warehouse licenses is still active." Reese looked up sharply. "Where?" "Just outside Portland, rented to a shell corporation under the name V. Petrov, Russian national. Guess what else?" His travel records show he entered the U.S. 6 times in the last 4 years under different aliases. Reese's pulse quickened. Volkov. Lyra handed him the coffee. This guy's no contractor. He's ex-Spetsnaz, now freelancing in weapons logistics, mostly biotech stuff, not the kind you get off shelves. So why use an abandoned forest tunnel in California? That's what we need to find out. Later that morning, Reese visited a former bureau contact, Vera Mendoza, a retired intelligence analyst who owed him a favor. Vera didn't ask many questions, but when Reese laid the field notes and crate barcode on her kitchen table, her face darkened. "You're touching something old," she said quietly, "something we were never meant to revisit." "What do you mean?" She pulled out a dusty binder from her bookshelf, flipping through until she landed on a photo, black and white, grainy. A younger Volkov, standing beside a freight crate marked with the same symbol Reese had seen underground. It was called Project Meridian, co-run between the U.S. and former Soviet labs during the Cold War, the TOW. "I tested containment strategies for unknown pathogens. None of it was official. And the tunnels? Built for fail-safe storage. If an outbreak occurred, they'd lock it underground. Seal it forever. Except..." Vera's voice dropped. "Some of those containers were never accounted for. Rumor was, one disappeared before the site was shut down." Reese stared down at the photo, rage and fear colliding in his chest. "Elena found it." "Yes," Vera said. "And that means whoever reactivated the tunnels knew exactly what they were after." That night, Reese sat in his car outside the ridge, watching the tree line through binoculars. It was quiet. Still. But something had changed. The forest no longer felt abandoned. He stepped out of the car, hiking back toward the dried canal. With each step, the memories clawed up again. Elena's laugh, her sharp wit, her way of making the world feel slightly less broken. And then he saw it. A faint glimmer. Half buried near the base of the canal wall, just a flash of metal under the moss. He knelt, brushing it away. Another transmitter, smaller, older. This one wasn't bureau-issued. It was civilian-grade, possibly something she'd bartered for or scavenged from inside the tunnels. He turned it over in his hand and froze. It wasn't hers. Scratched onto the casing in careful block letters were the initials APA Second Person. Someone else had been down there with her. He turned the transmitter on. No power, but the model was traceable. Back at the motel, he plugged it into his laptop and ran a local scan using bureau decoding software. Location history showed 4 points over the last 3 months, all clustered within a 2-mile radius of the canal ridge. Movement patterns suggested someone had been accessing the tunnels from the inside, a survivor. The next morning, Reese contacted Lyra. "We need to go back in, today. Are you sure? There's someone else in there, and they might know what happened to Elena." Lyra was quiet for a long time, then, "Okay, but this time we bring more gear." They packed CAD oxygen meters, portable floodlights, stabilized rope ladders, non-lethal weapons, 2 body cams. They descended before noon. This time, they entered from the secondary shaft, through the canal vent system Lyra had uncovered. It led them deeper, past the chambers they'd already explored, toward a sealed access hatch they'd previously bypassed. With Lyra's tools, they forced it open. Inside was a narrow room, bare, quiet, and then a voice. "Don't move." A flashlight beam cut through the dark, landing square on Reese's chest. A woman stepped forward, gaunt but alert, holding a makeshift weapon fashioned from rebar and wire. Her voice cracked as she spoke again. "You're not with Volkov." Reese shook his head slowly. "We're here for Elena Navarro." The woman's expression faltered. Her grip loosened. "Elena's gone," she whispered, "but not dead." Reese stepped closer. "Who are you?" Her voice barely audible. "Agent Abigail Price, Bureau Surveillance Division. Missing since 2021. Reese's heart stopped. Elena hadn't been the only one. This went deeper than anyone imagined. Agent Abigail Price hadn't seen daylight in over 400 days. Her cheeks were sunken, skin pale as parchment, but her eyes burned with clarity. Survival had sharpened her like a blade. She lowered her makeshift weapon and stepped back, signaling them in. Reese and Lyra followed her into the chamber, ducking beneath hanging wires and broken ventilation shafts. The space was cramped, the air damp. It looked like it had once been a storage room, now turned into a bunker. Abigail motioned them to sit, then shut the door behind them. "Don't stay long. The walls hear things." "What do you mean?" Lyra asked quietly. Abigail turned toward Reese. "You're from the Bureau, right?" He nodded. "I was. Special Agent Reese Halston. I'm looking for Agent Elena Navarro." A flicker of emotion crossed her face. Pain, recognition, something deeper. "I remember her," Abigail said. "We met once, 2 years ago. Brief surveillance overlap in Los Angeles. She was sharp, honest, too honest." She paused, then took a slow breath. She didn't vanish by accident. Over the next hour, Abigail unraveled a story so tangled, so staggering, that Reese felt the air drain from the room as she spoke. She'd been stationed at the San Francisco field office in late 2020, working back-end surveillance for the Bureau's Domestic Counter-Threat Initiative. A file came across her desk flagged as a ghost asset anomaly, one of thousands. Except this one had 2 red tags: Project Cindergate. Known collateral: Agent Elena Navarro. Abigail started digging. The deeper she went, the worse it got. Cindergate wasn't a theory, it was real. A shadow project buried beneath bureaucratic noise and shell companies, funded by redirected emergency budgets and masked under wilderness rehabilitation funds. The goal? Test biological containment and resilience protocols using isolated sites and untraceable subjects, allegedly decommissioned in 1999. But evidence suggested someone had restarted operations, and they were still using agents, disposable ones. Abigail tried to escalate it internally, quietly, but within a week her system access was revoked, her credentials were flagged. And one morning, on her way to work, her car veered off a back road, brakes cut. She survived. Barely. A week later, she disappeared voluntarily, vanished off the grid and infiltrated the ridge on foot using old Bureau maps. She'd been hiding here ever since. "They rotate every 6 weeks, Abigail whispered. "Different teams, all former military or foreign contractors, never the same faces twice. The ridge is a node, just a transit point." "For what?" Reese asked. Abigail hesitated, then stepped to the corner of the chamber, pulling up a heavy tarp. Underneath, a lead-lined case, dusty but sealed. She unlocked it with a metal key around her neck. Inside, several small vials. Fluid-filled, labeled "Own Laos." "I with QR codes and a red stripe." "Samples," she said. "I took them from the transfer unit 3 months ago. They're not normal pathogens, synthetic, genetically unstable. One of the men called them phase red." Reese stared at the case in disbelief. "They're moving biological weapons through federal forest land?" "Testing them," Abigail corrected. "On wildlife, on human volunteers. Some were prisoners, others weren't." Lyra stepped back, visibly shaken. "I saw one of the test subjects," Abigail said. "Once, near Sector 4. They kept him in a tank. Shaved head, eyes, wrong. Like he'd been hollowed out. He wasn't sick. He was changing." Reese's hands trembled. "This is what Elena found." Abigail nodded. She was getting close, too close. Volkov and his team moved fast. I think they drugged her. Maybe even staged the raid to cover the extraction. There was never any cabin threat. It was a setup. Reese's jaw clenched. All of it. The disappearance, the silence from HQ, the sealed files. It had been deliberate. Elena had walked into a trap, and no one had come looking, except him. "There's more," Abigail said, motioning toward her gear pile. She dug out a tattered notebook and handed it to Reese, Elena's handwriting. "Price is still alive. Heard her voice near Sector 3 but couldn't reach. They moved me again. Told me I'd be transferred to Containment South if I didn't cooperate. I'm trying to delay, trying to hide the transmitter. One still active in Hairclip, the other. I dropped it near the grate shaft. Someone might find it." Reese felt his throat tighten. "She was alive, until at least a month ago," Abigail said. "After that, I don't know." Lyra turned. "What about now? Is she still here?" "I don't think so," Abigail said softly. "They clear sectors fast. If she was deemed non-compliant—" "No," Reese interrupted. "She's alive. She has to be." Suddenly, a low vibration pulsed through the floor. Abigail's expression darkened. "They're back." Reese looked at her sharply. "Who?" "The next team. They always return just before dusk. Supply run first, then extraction." Lyra whispered, "We have to get out of here." Abigail nodded. "There's an emergency shaft behind Sector 2. It exits into a dried ravine near the southern edge of the ridge." "Can you lead us?" "I can try," she said, "but we'll have to move fast and quiet." They packed quickly, sealing the case and wrapping it in cloth. As they slipped through a narrow breach in the wall, Reese took one last glance at the room where Abigail had survived for over a year. This forest had buried 100 secrets, but one of them was clawing its way out. As they moved down the corridor, Reese whispered, "If Elena's not here—" "She's in the next node," Abigail said. "Containment South. That's where they move subjects they don't want discovered." Reese didn't blink. "Then that's where I'm going." It took nearly 3 hours to navigate the emergency shaft. Crawling, sliding, wading waist-deep through rusted pipes and jagged ductwork. Reese's shoulders ached from carrying the sealed vial case. Lyra led from the front using a handheld heat sensor. Abigail brought up the rear, every few feet pausing, listening. The deeper they moved, the warmer the air grew. "They keep the southern sector climate-controlled," Abigail whispered. "Low oxygen, high humidity, something about optimal containment conditions. Never made sense to me, unless whatever's down there breathes different." Reese said nothing. He could feel it now, too, something wrong with the air, like it had memory. The shaft finally opened into a vertical drainage tunnel. Abigail climbed first, using footholds chipped into the concrete. Halfway up she turned. "There's a breach ahead, man-made. Someone cut it recently." They passed through the jagged hole into a cylindrical corridor, lined with black insulation and low red lights. The walls hummed faintly, like something was running. Behind them, electricity, still active. They were inside Containment South. The corridor turned sharply, opening into a wide room with grated floors and rows of sealed doors. Most were locked. A few were scorched. A smell lingered, sterile chemicals mixed with something feral. They weren't alone. Lyra lifted her scanner. "I'm getting body heat. 6 signatures. Stationary. No movement." Reese peered through the nearest grated door. Inside, a cot, shackles, and something worse. Scratch marks on the wall. Numbers. Tally marks. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Someone had been counting the days. He turned away, heart pounding. They were keeping people here. "Not just people," Abigail said grimly. "Subjects." She gestured to a nearby metal locker. Reese opened it. Inside, a bundle of hazmat suits and a tray of labeled syringes. Red stripe, same as the vials. "They were dosing them," Lyra whispered. "Trying to transform something." Reese's fists clenched. "Then we end it." Suddenly the lights flickered, then went out. Complete blackness. Abigail cursed under her breath and reached for her flashlight. But Reese had already turned his. Not on the hallway, on the floor. Something had just moved beneath the grated walkway. A shadow, low to the ground, fast. Then, a sound. Somewhere between a cough and a growl. "Move," Reese said. "Now." They ran. Footsteps pounding over metal, the echo distorted by the low curved walls. Another sound followed them, louder now, heavier. Something was behind them. Chasing. They reached a sealed door marked Sector F. Abigail entered a code, old but still valid. The lock clicked open and they burst inside. The door slammed shut behind them just as something heavy slammed into it from the other side. The room was smaller, circular, lined with glass panels. A control station stood at the center, half dismantled. But Reese wasn't looking at the machines. He was staring at the window. A single chair, a metal sink, a cot, and curled in the corner, arms wrapped tightly around her knees, was Elena. His heart stopped. For a second, he thought it was a hallucination. But then she turned. Her eyes, hollow and slow to recognize, locked with his. And he saw it, the spark, a single breath. "Rhys?" she whispered. He dropped the case and ran to the chamber door. "Elena, it's me. I'm here. I'm getting you out." Lyra was already working the panel, trying to override the interior locks. Abigail stepped beside Elena's window, pressing her palm to the glass. "Hey, Navarro, we're real. You're not hallucinating. We're getting you out of here." Tears filled Elena's eyes, her voice shaking. "They said you were dead. They said nobody would come." "They lied," Rhys said. The lock finally clicked open. He stepped inside, dropping to his knees beside her. She flinched at first, then recognition bloomed. "Rhys," she sobbed. He held her, tight. For the first time in a year, he felt whole. But the moment didn't last. Another impact shook the door behind them. The thing in the tunnel hadn't gone far. Abigail spun around. "We need to move. Now." Elena could barely walk. Whatever they'd done to her, drugs, isolation, had weakened her body. But she still had fight in her, still clung to Rhys's arm, forcing herself to move. They carried her between them, back through the winding corridor toward the shaft. But as they neared the access point, Lyra suddenly raised her hand. "Wait," she whispered. Footsteps. Human. Boots on concrete. Voices. Not mutated things. Men. Armed. Flashlights cut through the dark at the far end of the tunnel. One voice barked in Russian, the others fanned out. "Extraction team," Abigail hissed. "Volkov's men." "We can't fight them head-on," Rhys said. "Not with Elena like this." Abigail turned, pointing to a side corridor. "It leads to the canal vent. Long route, but it's open air at the end." They ran. Behind them, shouts rose. Flashlights spotted. The motion. Gunfire cracked. A bullet struck the wall beside Rhys's head. They ducked into the vent corridor, running blind, crawling at points. At one moment, Rhys had to drag Elena through a muddy section with no floor. She never complained. She knew this was the only way out. At last, daylight. A thin slice of it, filtering through the rusted grate above. Rhys boosted Elena up as Lyra and Abigail pried the grate loose from above. The sun hit Elena's skin, and for the first time in a year, she wept. She was free. They pulled her through. Rhys followed. All four of them spilled out into the ravine, mud-covered, bleeding, but alive. In the distance, sirens. Abigail turned her head. "Did you call someone?" Rhys shook his head. "No." They looked up. A black SUV skidded to a stop at the edge of the ridge. Two figures jumped out, forestry officers. One held a drone controller, the other a field scanner. "We followed your signal," the older one said. "Got a blip near the southern tunnels. Didn't expect to find this." His eyes locked on Elena, on the red vials in Rhys's pack, then to Abigail. "I thought you were dead." Abigail wiped mud from her face and gave a grim smile. "So did I." Elena sat in the back of the forestry officer's SUV, wrapped in a wool blanket, her eyes barely blinking as the trees zipped by. Rhys sat beside her, silent. The officer driving, Garrett Muir, a retired Coast Guard search specialist turned federal forest enforcement, kept glancing at them in the rearview mirror. His partner, Joanna Tripp, handled the drone scanner on her lap, rewatching the telemetry footage that had brought them here. "That signal we picked up," she muttered, "came from a transmitter embedded inside a hair clip?" Rhys nodded. "Standard issue. Tactical microbeacon. Navarro hit it before she vanished." Garrett whistled. "That thing pinged once. Just once, and only for 12 seconds. "She timed it," Abigail added from the front passenger seat. "She knew exactly how long the jammers were down." "She must have waited a year for that moment," Rhys murmured. No one said anything for a while after that. They arrived at a restricted helipad clearing by nightfall. 3 bureau vehicles, a medical evac chopper, and 2 unmarked vans were waiting. But Rhys didn't move. He looked at Elena. "Do you want to go with them?" he asked gently. She looked up slowly. "I want to be somewhere that doesn't smell like concrete and rust," she whispered. He smiled sadly. "Then I'll be right behind you." The medics helped her onto the stretcher, and she reached for Rhys's hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't give up on me." "Never," he replied. They buried you under lies. I just had to dig. She smiled faintly, then turned to look at Abigail. You're the one who survived in the tunnels. I'm nobody, Abigail said. No, Elena said. You're proof that the truth can survive too. As the helicopter lifted, Reese stood watching the light fade into the stars. Joanna approached. What now? We expose it, Reese said. Every part of it. Garrett looked skeptical. You think they'll let that happen? No, Reese said. That's why I'm not asking. He pulled a small drive from his coat pocket. The case of red-striped vials had been handed off already, but this, a full data dump Abigail had compiled during her year underground, was the key. Evidence of unauthorized experiments, disappearances, shadow funding, rewritten personnel records, and encrypted files dating back decades. Cindergate was bigger than anyone imagined, and it wasn't just one site. There were others. 3 weeks later, Elena Navarro sat across from a federal panel. Her statement, while heavily redacted, confirmed multiple elements of what Reese and Abigail had uncovered. She'd spent 9 months underground, coerced into participating in psychological and biological endurance tests. She had not broken, but she had nearly died more than once. She remembered the subjects, prisoners, runaways, undocumented migrants, disposable lives. They were tested for resistance, for control, for transformation. Some of them never came back. One tried to escape and was burned alive in the tunnel fire of 22, explained publicly as an accidental gas rupture. Elena had been told she'd meet the same fate if she resisted, and yet she had resisted every day. The panel concluded. But the deeper case remained sealed, internal affairs, off the record. Officially, no wrongdoing had occurred. Unofficially, a dozen agents retired early, 2 directors resigned, and 6 bodies were found in a remote southern holding facility after an unexplained electrical fire. All unidentifiable, all burned. 1 month later, a small memorial appeared at the trailhead near Ridge 24. No sign, no plaque, just a stack of river stones and a plastic hair clip resting gently on top. Reese stood there with Abigail. She asked me to leave it, he said. She remembers everything, Abigail replied. They stood in silence as wind rustled the trees. Did you ever see what was in the tanks? Reese asked finally. Abigail didn't answer right away. Then, no, just glimpses, limbs, shapes, things not built to survive sunlight. Reese looked back at the hair clip. They're still out there, aren't they? Abigail nodded slowly. They'll move, change names, change locations. Cindergate wasn't the start. It's just a chapter. And Elena? She'll speak, someday, when they stop watching. That night, somewhere deep beneath another forgotten stretch of wilderness, a red light flickered on, in a different tunnel, in a different state. 2 men in gray coats entered a sealed chamber and looked over the contents of a storage vault marked Recovered Assets, Phase Red. In the corner sat a cryo unit. Inside, a subject with no name, no racial origin. His eyes were open, and they were no longer human.